When an enemy betrays you, you get angry. When your brother betrays you, you die. But I didn't die. I just became quieter, and much more dangerous. I still remember the taste of that morning. Bitter coffee, dry mouth, the silence in the boardroom as they slid the folder across the table like it was nothing. Pages thick with accusations I hadn't seen before that day. The CFO wouldn't meet my eyes. Legal was already on the call, her voice clipped and cautious. But Caleb sat there like he was caught in the middle, eyes wide, face tight with practiced concern. Tom, he said softly, we're not saying this is intentional. Maybe it's just accounting discrepancies. Discrepancies. That was the word they used to gut me. I looked at him. My brother. Same boy I carried on my shoulders when he was 5, the one I taught to ride a bike, to throw a punch, to stand up straight when things got rough. My blood. My partner. I built Ward & Company. From the ground up with our father. Long nights in the warehouse, sleeping under desks, packaging product by hand before we could afford machines. I was the one who computerized our systems, expanded our supply chain, hired the engineers that made our competitors sweat. Caleb? He came in years later, full of charm and ideas, most of them mine, just repackaged with better lighting. And I never resented him for it. I thought we were a team. You were the suits. I did the work. He smiled for the cameras. I kept the gears turning. Until suddenly, the gears jammed. And I was the one thrown under the machine. They said funds were missing. That approvals bore my name. Signatures matched. Authorizations logged. My own handwriting, my own passwords. It was all there, neat and damning. And I knew, instantly, how it had been done. I trained Caleb on our systems myself. I didn't protest. Didn't raise my voice. What would have been the point? Truth has no weight when a lie walks in first. I left the meeting with a single nod. No goodbye. No outburst. Just a quiet acceptance. That's what scared them, I think. Not rage, silence. I packed my office in 23 minutes. My name's still on the door. My initials still engraved on the glass plaque outside. No one helped me. A few glanced up from their desks, then quickly looked away. Cowards. Caleb didn't walk me out. He'd done his part. A week later, a public statement went out. Irregularities found. Thomas Ward stepping aside to ensure transparency. The company's value dropped for 2 days, then rebounded even higher. Funny how betrayal, spun well, can be profitable. I disappeared. Completely. New city. New job. Something low profile. I didn't use my name. Didn't contact old colleagues. Even left my phone behind. I needed the world to forget me. To bury me under dust and time. But I wasn't dead. Not even close. I was watching. Waiting. Learning. See, Caleb was always the face. But I was the architect. I knew the weight of every decision, the soft seams in every process. And I knew one thing for sure. You can build a lie high enough to touch the clouds. But if the foundation is rotten, all it takes is one well-placed crack. And I was done waiting. I wasn't coming for revenge. I was coming for correction. And correction is always more painful than revenge. Because revenge is fire. Correction is cold. And cold breaks slowly. I didn't leave town the next day. I left that night. One suitcase. No warning. No farewell. No trace. They expected a reaction, a denial, a press conference, maybe even a lawsuit. But I gave them nothing. That's the trick. When you don't defend yourself, people don't know what to do with you. They expect resistance. They're trained for it. Silence. That unnerves them. It makes them wonder what you're planning. Even if you aren't planning anything at all. Back then, I wasn't planning. Not yet. I stayed off the grid. Rented a small apartment under a name I hadn't used since college. A quiet town in the hills, 3 hours from the city. The kind of place where no one asks questions as long as you pay in cash and keep to yourself. I took a job fixing antique machinery. Old things. Honest things. Rusted gears, cracked dials, brass fittings that once held meaning. It felt good to work with my hands again. Things made sense in that world. If something broke, you found the crack, tightened the bolt, and it worked again. No politics. No board votes. No knives in the back. I lived like that for almost a year. No suits. No headlines. No reminders. And yet, every morning, as I drank my coffee on the porch and watched the fog roll down the mountain, I thought about him. Caleb, my little brother. The man I protected, covered for, sacrificed for. The man I'd given my trust, and in return, got a knife between the ribs, and a smile in front of the cameras. I thought about how calm he must have felt. How proud, sitting in our father's chair, wearing my silence like a badge of victory. But silence isn't surrender. It's stage one. By the second year, I started reading again, industry reports, financial filings, interviews, buried shareholder notes. I didn't search for Caleb's name. I didn't need to. I knew where to look. I'd built the foundation he was walking on. The cracks were already there. He just hadn't noticed them yet. One of the old vendors from our supply chain was now suddenly owned by a shell company. That company, I found, was linked to another holding firm in Delaware, one I recognized from back when Caleb briefly dabbled in side investments. I traced one wire transfer, then another, then 20. It was all legal, technically, but legal doesn't mean clean. I printed nothing, stored nothing digitally, just notes in my head, and sometimes handwritten diagrams I burned after. There's no substitute for caution, not when you've already seen what trust costs. One night, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. It was an old friend from the company. He didn't say much, just, "I never believed it was you, Tom. Not for a second. Thought you should know, things aren't as perfect as they seem back here." Click. No return number. But it was enough. I leaned back in the chair and looked out at the darkness beyond the porch light. The mountain was silent. No wind. No motion. It was time. Not to act. Not yet. Just to return. Quietly. Softly. The same way I'd left. A shadow doesn't announce its presence. It just follows you. Until the light is gone. I came back in autumn. It felt appropriate. Things fall in autumn. Leaves. Temperature. Masks. I didn't go back to the city. Not right away. I moved to a small town just outside of it. Close enough to watch. Far enough to stay invisible. Rented a modest house under another name. Paid the first 6 months in cash. Nobody asked questions. They rarely do when you smile and keep to yourself. I dressed like someone nobody notices. Neutral colors. Worn shoes. No flash. I became the kind of man people walk past without a second glance. There's a power in that, in not being seen. My first real stop was the building I helped design. Ward & Company. Headquarters. 15 stories of steel, glass, and self-congratulation. I didn't go inside. I stood across the street for nearly an hour. Caleb's face was on a banner draped above the entrance. Legacy. Leadership. Vision. My chest didn't tighten. My hands didn't shake. I just watched. Eventually, I saw him. He came out with a group of executives, laughing, waving to someone behind tinted windows. He looked thinner, more polished. Same haircut. Same tailored suit style I once recommended. He still walked with the same cocky stride, like he owned the ground. Maybe he thought he did. He stopped to take a call, turned toward the glass. For a moment, I wondered if he'd see me through the reflection. He didn't. People like Caleb never look behind the glass, only into it. When he vanished inside a black SUV, I finally walked away. I started attending public board meetings. Quietly. They don't ask for identification at those. Not when you sit near the back, head down, no questions. I listened, took notes, watched faces. There was tension beneath the surface. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Financials that didn't quite add up. A board member, Lindholm, pressed a little too hard on quarterly expenses, and I saw Caleb's jaw tighten. Barely, but it was there. Something was cracking. Good. That week, I visited the old manufacturing plant, the one where it all began. It was quiet. Half of it had been sold off, outsourced to cheaper labor overseas. The remaining floor was automated, cold, efficient. No more hand-assembled pride. Just machines humming under fluorescent lights. I found a name on the wall. Mine. A plaque near the security desk. Thomas Ward, Expansion Director, 2002 to 2014. The guard didn't know who I was. I stood right under my own name and asked for a visitor form. He gave me one. No questions. People forget faster than they admit. As I left, I snapped a picture of the plaque. Not for sentiment. For proof. That I had been here. That I had built this. They may have erased me from the articles, the speeches, the website bios, but they couldn't rewrite every wall. Back home, I started building a map. Not of streets. Of connections. Old suppliers. Investment firms. Shell corporations. I pulled threads, slowly, carefully. Every name Caleb had ever dropped in a pitch deck. Every company that suddenly got a Ward & Company contract despite no track record. Every trust account linked to our father's estate. He'd hidden the trail well, but not well enough. You can't fake the rhythm of real growth. I saw the artificial plateaus, the inflated margins. Knew exactly what kind of game he was playing. He hadn't just stolen the company. He was bleeding it. Quietly, cautiously, just enough to stay under the radar. Smart, but not smarter than me. One night, I found the paper I'd been waiting for. A quiet amendment filed with the county. Reclassification of our father's estate into a trust under a new name. No press release. No public statement. But inside that document, buried in legal phrasing, Caleb's signature. And mine. Except I never signed it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled. Finally, he'd made a mistake. And I was done watching. A forged signature is like a lie written in ink. Permanent, but fragile. One smudge, one loop out of place, and it betrays itself. I sat in the dim kitchen, the copy of the estate amendment in front of me, lit only by the soft glow of the overhead bulb. It had been filed quietly 3 years ago. No witnesses I recognized. No notary with a reputation worth questioning. And yet, there it was, a signature that looked like mine, next to a name I would never have signed under. Thomas R. Ward, trustee. I never added that R. That was Caleb's flourish. He always thought details were decoration. I knew they were everything. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and closed my eyes. He'd made a mistake. Not the forgery. That was expected. No, the mistake was the date. The amendment had been filed 2 months after I'd been publicly ousted from the company. And yet, it claimed I had signed it willingly, granting full authority over the trust, including all property and assets, to Caleb Ward for streamlining operations. It wasn't just immoral. It was criminal. I opened the drawer beneath the table and pulled out my old ledger. Not digital. Handwritten. Inside it were all the notes I'd kept before I disappeared. Conversations. Signatures. Times and dates. Real ones. Not the kind that get rewritten by lawyers with nervous hands. This was the kind of truth you couldn't erase. That week, I visited a retired paralegal who used to work under my father. Cynthia Dell. She lived in a small house on a quiet street. Her garden wild but carefully tended. I didn't call ahead. Just knocked. She opened the door slowly, peered at me, and gasped. Thomas. I hadn't heard my name spoken like that in years. She invited me in without a word. I told her what I'd found, slowly, cautiously. She listened. Eyes sharp. She hadn't forgotten anything. Said she'd seen strange filings about a year after I disappeared. Her old firm had been replaced. Caleb claimed he wanted a younger team. He always had a gift for phrases that said nothing but sounded decisive. Cynthia promised to look into the amendments trail. Paper still leaves footprints, she said, especially the kind printed by men who think no one's following them. Before I left, I asked her something else. Did my father ever change the will before he died? She hesitated, looked at me carefully. Yes, she said finally, but not the way they claim. He added something. Not removed. What did he add? A clause. One only you would have understood. Something about a cold ledger. My mouth went dry. He had known. Some part of him had suspected what Caleb was becoming, and left a message buried in the legal language, a code only I would recognize. The ledger. This one. The one I kept locked in a steel box beneath the floorboards of a rented house no one knew I lived in. He'd trusted me with the truth, even if he hadn't had the strength to stop Caleb himself. That night, I lit a fire in the small fireplace and burned the photocopy of the amendment. Not out of anger. Out of principle. I didn't need it anymore. I had something better. The original lie, and the truth that stood behind it. People like Caleb always think they're playing chess. That every move is calculated, every step controlled. But they forget something important. The game only works when the other player is still sitting across the board. I hadn't moved my pieces yet. But I was there. And soon, he'd realize he wasn't playing alone. I'd been invisible long enough. That was the next phase. Not confrontation, not accusation, just presence. Let him see me. Just once. Let him feel the shift in the air. I started with the gallery. Ward & Company was hosting a fundraiser for urban manufacturing innovation, a thin excuse to wine and dine investors in a downtown venue lined with high ceilings and empty promises. Caleb would be there. Of course he would. He never missed a camera or a chance to be adored. I didn't RSVP. I didn't need to. I simply walked in. Gray suit, black tie, No name tag. You'd be surprised how easy it is to blend into wealth when you look like you belong. No one asks who you are when you hold your glass with the right hand and nod with the right silence. I drifted through the crowd, watched him across the room. He was working it. Perfect posture, warm smile, hand on every elbow. The master of performance. The king in his stolen kingdom. Then our eyes met. He froze. Just for a second. A flicker. The smallest hesitation. But I saw it. His smile stayed, but his pupils sharpened. His hand, resting on some investor's shoulder, twitched. He didn't walk toward me. Didn't say a word. He just turned away, too fast, and made a line for the bar. I didn't follow. I wanted that seed planted. I left before dessert. No scene. No whispers. Just absence where a presence had been. He would sleep differently that night. The next day, I paid a visit to an old supplier. Jacob Steele. They'd worked with us back in the early days. Rough hands, honest terms, good people. I hadn't seen Jim Jacobs in a decade. He stared at me when I walked into his office, jaw slack. "Tom, is that really you?" I nodded. He didn't ask why I'd disappeared. Didn't ask what Caleb had done. Just pointed to the chair across from his desk and said, "You look tired." I told him I needed a favor. I needed to know if Ward and Company had been altering supplier rates, issuing silent kickbacks through intermediary firms. I described the pattern. The shell companies. The inflated logistics costs. His face hardened. "Yeah," he said. I thought something smelled. He didn't have hard proof, but he'd noticed it starting 2 years ago. New contracts, same orders, higher prices. He'd questioned it. Got stonewalled. "I'll dig," he said. "For you." I thanked him. Told him not to email. I'd call. On the way out, I left behind a small card. Not a business card. Just a note. He forged my name on my father's estate. That's why I left. I didn't sign it. He'd know. That week, I started being seen. I let myself be spotted at cafes near the Ward building. A glimpse at the courthouse. A walk past our father's old law firm. Not too obvious, just enough for rumors to begin. 2 former employees reached out. One was a quiet accountant who'd always kept her head down. She sent a message through an encrypted server I'd set up years ago, back when I thought cybersecurity was just another layer of protection, not survival. She wrote, "If you're back, I have something you should see." They made me sign it. I still have the original. I didn't reply. I just read it. Again and again. I was no longer a ghost. I was a memory. And memories, the right ones, make people sweat more than fear. Because fear is sharp, fast. But memory lingers. And Caleb was starting to remember who taught him how to play. Caleb never liked silence. He needed noise, applause, headlines, background music. He filled rooms with his voice, his ideas, his name. That's how he kept the mirror intact. As long as it stayed loud, he didn't have to look too closely. But now the noise was thinning. The people around him, the ones who only clapped when others clapped first, had started asking quiet questions. I could feel it. Not because he said anything. Caleb would never speak directly. But the company's PR releases grew more frequent. His photo ops more forced. I read one press article twice. Noticed how carefully it avoided mentioning our father's legacy. That was new. That was him trying to erase the shadow I'd left behind. But shadows don't go away. Not when they start moving. And I was moving. The accountant who'd messaged me, her name was Helena, met me in the back of an old church library, the kind of place where everything smells like dust and forgotten trust. She brought a folder. No digital copies. Just ink. Inside were 2 memos. Internal directives signed by Caleb and a board attorney I recognized. They were dated 18 months after my departure. One of them described a shift in estate asset control, citing uncooperative stakeholders and recommending retroactive authorization for trust transition. Helena tapped the bottom of the page. "See that? A date mismatch." The memo referenced a meeting that never occurred. I knew because the man it claimed was present had died 2 weeks before. "Why show me this now?" I asked. She looked tired. Not scared, just worn. I stayed quiet because I thought maybe you really had done it. Maybe they had proof. But you showing up again, it reminded me what real leadership looked like. I didn't respond. I just took the papers, folded them carefully, and stood. "Helena," I said before I left, "don't talk to anyone else about this." She nodded. "I haven't. I won't." Back home, I pinned the memos to the wall beside my notes. Threads were starting to intersect. One shell company tied to a logistics firm, whose CFO shared a last name with Caleb's college roommate. A quarterly transfer listed as a consultation retainer with no hours logged. Another trust, this one hidden under the name of our old family dog. He was getting sloppy. That's what happens when you think you've won. I called Jim Jacobs. Find anything? More than I expected, he said. Contracts changed hands 5 times. Same buyer. Different names. All overpriced. Guess who ends up profiting each time? I didn't guess. I already knew. Then came the voicemail. I didn't expect it. Not this soon. Tom. It's Caleb. No apology. Just my name, like we'd spoken yesterday. I don't know what you're doing, or what this is supposed to be, but you need to stop. You walking around, it's making people talk. You said you were done. No, Caleb. I never said that. I just left. You decided what that meant. He ended the message with a threat dressed as concern. Whatever you think you're proving, it'll hurt the company. Dad wouldn't have wanted that. Oh, there it was. The invocation of our father, like a shield. He used to be so good at that. But now I could hear the edge in his voice. Not anger. Worry. I didn't call him back. Instead, I scheduled a lunch. Not with Caleb. With Lindholm, the one board member who still asked questions during meetings. We met at a quiet bistro. I wore sunglasses. He wore suspicion. When I slid the first memo across the table, his fingers twitched. When I slid the second, he looked up. You realize, he said carefully, what this could mean. I do, I replied. And you're not going public. Not yet. But if I do, I won't be the only name attached to the fallout. Everyone who knew and did nothing. They'll fall too. He stared at me a long time. Then he nodded, slow, reluctant, but real. I'll look into it. That's all I needed. Not loyalty. Just motion. Because once a mirror starts to crack, all it takes is one breath. And I was about to exhale. It started small. A financial blog most people didn't read ran a piece on emerging irregularities in Ward & Company's logistics deals. No accusations. Just questions. But questions were enough. By the end of the week, the company's press office had issued 2 clarifying statements and 1 vague threat of litigation against irresponsible speculation. That wasn't for the public. That was for me. I wasn't worried. The echo had reached the glass. And I knew Caleb was watching. Lindholm didn't call. He didn't have to. 2 days after our meeting, a scheduled board vote was postponed due to unforeseen review of financial disclosures. I checked the public notes. No one named a source. But I recognized the wording. My fingerprints were invisible, but everywhere. I started visiting places connected to our family name. Not hiding, just showing up. The University Scholarship Fund in my father's name. A veterans center he'd once donated to. A museum wing with a plaque that still bore both our names, side by side. People looked at me like a ghost walking upright. Some were awkward, others curious. No one asked me why I was back. They all already knew. Truth doesn't always need to be spoken. Sometimes it just needs to be seen, like a crack in a wall that reminds you the whole building might be wrong. On Friday, I went to the cemetery. My father's grave is simple. Granite. No flourish. Just his name, and the words, "Build honestly." He had a sense of humor like that. Quiet. Sharp. Weighty in its simplicity. I brought no flowers. I just stood there, reading the inscription again and again. I used to think he'd turned on me at the end, signed the papers Caleb gave him, believed the headlines, stayed silent when I needed him to speak. But now I knew better. He hadn't betrayed me. He just didn't know how deep the betrayal ran. Or maybe he did, and left me the only tool he had left. Trust. A clause. A whisper in a will. A name left off a document that should have sealed me out completely, but didn't. He left me a crack to slip through. And that was enough. That weekend, a package arrived at Caleb's estate. He would have opened it in his office. That's where he still handled anything too delicate for assistance. Inside was a single item, a framed copy of the original trust document. Untouched. The last legitimate filing our father ever signed. No note. No fingerprints. No sender. Just the truth, preserved under glass. On Monday, my phone buzzed. Private number. No message. Then another. Then another. Caleb didn't speak. Not at first. I let him breathe into the line for 6 full seconds. Then, finally, "What do you want?" I let the silence hold. "I gave you everything," he snapped. "The company. The future. You walked away." "No," I said. "You pushed me. You weren't built for it." You were stuck in the past. You forged my name. That stopped him. You can always hear the truth land. It doesn't bounce. It hits. Hard. You don't have proof. I don't need it. You do. Another silence. This one different. He was recalculating. Then he said the thing I'd been waiting for. We can fix this. Quietly. No reason to tear everything down. Fix. That word again. As if this were a technical error. A minor misalignment. You don't fix rot. You cut it out. You build a house of glass, Caleb, I said calmly. And you made it look like stone. But I'm not the one with rocks in my hands now. You are. He hung up. Good. Now he'd stop pretending. Later that night, I got a text from Helena. Audit committee scheduling emergency session. Lindholm pushing it. Caleb scrambling. I read it twice. Then I poured myself a drink. Not to celebrate. That would come later. This wasn't the end. This was the moment before the floor gives out. And I wasn't moving. Audit committee. 2 words that never made Caleb nervous before. But now it was different. He didn't control this meeting. He couldn't charm it, couldn't delay it, couldn't bury it in jargon or empty forecasts. An emergency session meant someone on the inside had raised a flag high enough that it couldn't be ignored. That someone was Lindholm. And behind Lindholm was me. Not in the room, but in every document, every signature, every silent inconsistency that had gone unnoticed for too long. The truth was there, hiding in plain sight. They just needed to be shown where to look. I spent that day walking through the part of town no one associated with Ward and Company anymore. The old district, where we started, where Caleb never really set foot until the cameras came. One of the warehouses we used to lease still had the Ward name faintly painted on its side. Weathered. Cracked. That's how real things look when they age. The company's new buildings were all glass and white stone, pretty, polished, empty. But this one still smelled like metal and sweat. I ran my hand over the wall as I passed. The paint flaked under my touch. That night, I received the first call from someone I hadn't heard from in years. One of the original engineers who'd helped me modernize the supply chain 15 years ago. He'd retired after Caleb's rise. Not fired, just pushed aside. He didn't say hello. Just, I heard what you're doing. What am I doing? I asked, reminding them who built it. Who actually built it? I didn't correct him. He offered to send over his notes from the year Caleb took control. Not damning, but enough to show a shift, vendor irregularities, authorization delays, pressure to approve blind contracts. A pattern, the kind of thing that, on its own, meant little, but stitched together, a tapestry of manipulation. I thanked him. He didn't ask what came next. That week, I sent a letter. Real paper. No digital trail. No return address. It was addressed to Ward and Company. Independent legal advisor. Someone external, untouchable, and most importantly, obligated by reputation to investigate internal misconduct when formally notified. Inside the envelope were 3 things. A copy of the trust Caleb forged. A timeline of discrepancies in supplier contracts. A note. If silence is complicity, then this is your choice to make. That was all. Sometimes pressure doesn't need volume. Just wait. 2 days later, a headline appeared. Ward and Company. Facing internal review following anonymous claims of financial irregularities. It was buried beneath bigger news, but it didn't need attention. It just needed oxygen. The company released a statement hours later. We take compliance seriously and have full confidence in our leadership team. That was Caleb, still pretending nothing was burning. But I knew the smoke was inside the walls. And once smoke gets in, you can't get it out. The next morning, I walked into the cafe across the street from Ward headquarters. I sat by the window, drank black coffee, opened a newspaper. I knew what would happen. Eventually, someone saw me. A junior executive, someone new, someone young, someone who only knew of me through whispers and buried press releases. She stared, froze, pulled out her phone. Perfect. By noon, I was certain Caleb had been told that I was sitting right there, calm, unbothered, not running. And that's when the game changed. Because predators don't panic when you fight back. They panic when you don't. When you sit still and wait. Because stillness says, you already lost. There's a kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. Not peace. Not rest. Just pressure, held in place for too long. That was the air around Ward and Company the morning the board demanded a full internal audit. It didn't make the news. Not right away. But I heard it. Through whispers, through body language, through absence. Caleb stopped appearing in public that week. No new photos. No statements. He was still leading, they said. Still working tirelessly behind the scenes. Of course he was. That's where shadows like him belong. In the places no one can see how desperate they've become. I received a message from Lindholm the same morning. No greeting. Just a date, a time, and a line. If you're going to finish this, come watch it fall. It was the audit committee session. Not public, but not protected from observation either. A handful of outsiders could be permitted in. Advisors, shareholders, quiet ghosts. I arrived early. The room was wood-paneled, designed to look like tradition. Like legacy. I'd sat in that room years ago, beside our father, when the company first passed $1 million in profit. The chair hadn't changed. The nameplate beside it had. Caleb's seat was empty when I entered. He came in 3 minutes late. That, in itself, told me everything. He didn't look surprised to see me. But he didn't look composed, either. He walked slower than usual. Carried a folder that, from the way his fingers gripped it, was heavier than it should have been. I didn't look away. He did. They opened the session with financial summaries. Boring, deliberate, but with language that scratched at the surface. Unexplained allocations. Vendor overlap. Unconfirmed signatory authority. All dressed up, but all pointed in one direction. Caleb stayed quiet. He tapped his pen. Once. Then again. The third time, it snapped in his hand. That's when Lindholm spoke. I think we should address the trust matter now. That word, trust, dropped like a stone in still water. Caleb tried to speak. Failed the first time. Then he said, "This is being handled privately." Lindholm didn't blink. It's no longer private. A man in the corner, the company's legal advisor, the one who received my letter, cleared his throat. Pulled out a file. What followed was 32 minutes of slow, clinical dismantling. Comparisons between signatures. Timeline mismatches. A forensic review showing digital edits layered over original scans. I watched Caleb shrink, inch by inch. Not visibly, just internally. The kind of collapse only brothers recognize. I could see the boy I grew up with, beneath the suit. The one who always copied my answers when no one was looking. And now he'd copied the wrong thing, my name. When it ended, no one stood. They just sat there, in the weight of it. Then someone from the board said the final line. "We'll need to consider formal removal. Effective immediately." That was it. No shouting. No scandal. Just an erasure, just like the one he gave me. I walked out before Caleb did. Passed through the lobby. Past the receptionist who didn't recognize me. Past the plaque that still bore his name. For now, outside, the city was bright. Clear. The way it only looks after a storm that hasn't quite hit the ground yet. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't need to. Because revenge is loud. Messy. But justice? Justice is quiet. The news broke 2 days later. Not front page. Just a quiet headline below the fold. Ward and Company. CEO steps down amid internal review. No mention of forged documents. No mention of the trust. Just discrepancies, mismanagement, and the ever-popular executive transition. Caleb would avoid jail. That much I knew. He'd made enough friends, paid enough people, stacked the board with enough loyalists to walk away clean, at least in the eyes of the law. But not in the eyes that mattered. The investors knew. The employees knew. The legacy knew. And most importantly, he knew. He lost something far worse than control. He lost the illusion. A week later, I was invited to the office. A different tone now. Not begging. Not apologizing. Just quiet recognition. Lindholm met me at the top floor. No fanfare. Just a handshake. "We'd like you to advise," he said. Officially. I raised an eyebrow. "We're rebuilding," he continued. "And the people who built it right the first time. Well, maybe we should have listened sooner." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the window and looked down at the lobby below. The company was still standing. Somehow. Even after everything. Not because Caleb protected it. Because I had. By letting it live, after all the damage he did. I'd made my point more powerfully than any press release ever could. I turned back. "I'll consult," I said. But not quietly. Lindholm looked confused. I clarified. "I won't pretend I was never here." He nodded. Slowly. That was enough. A month later, a new plaque was hung in the lobby. Smaller than Caleb's. Less polished. But it had weight. In recognition of Thomas Ward, for building what mattered. No quote. No flair. Just my name. Right where he had tried to erase it. I never visited Caleb. Never called. Never wrote. I didn't need to. I knew where he was. A smaller place now. Outside the city. He hadn't vanished, but he'd faded. The way people do when they're no longer being watched. Someone told me he tried to start another company. Tried to gather a few investors. Rebuild something of his own. It didn't take. You can't build trust when the first thing people see is the wreckage you left behind. As for me, I stayed involved. Not for power, not for control, but to make sure no one like him ever slipped through again. I trained people to read contracts like stories, to spot lies in numbers, to ask questions when it was easier to nod, not out of anger, but because legacy deserves guardians. Real ones. Sometimes I walk past my old house, the one he took, the one he rewrote the deed for. He doesn't live there anymore. It's on the market now. Empty windows, echoing rooms. Funny, he took it to feel like a man. I built it to be a home. Only one of us knew what it was worth. People think revenge is a moment, a knife in the dark, a courtroom win, a name cleared in lights. It's not. Revenge is just the heat that forges something better. The consequence isn't what I gave him. It's what I didn't. No fire. No fight. No chance to play the victim. Just exposure. Just silence, sharpened into shape. Just the world, seeing him as he truly was. I never needed to destroy him. I only needed to stop pretending he built anything. And now? Now the truth stands where I used to. Solid. Quiet. Unmoving. And it's not going anywhere.